What's the most ironic case of karma you've seen during a trial? Story 1. I was a juror on a criminal case a few years ago, and the defendant was a man accused of multiple counts of fraud. He was a slick, fast-talking businessman who had defrauded countless people out of their hard-earned money. He seemed to believe that he could charm his way out of anything, always trying to manipulate the courtroom with his smooth words. However, during the trial, one of the witnesses, a former colleague, came forward to testify. This person was one of the few who had managed to escape the fraudster's clutches. The irony came when the defendant tried to discredit the witness by calling them a liar. The witness, who had kept meticulous records over the years, presented a mountain of documents showing the defendant's scams, proving every word they said. In response, the defendant, thinking he could outsmart everyone, tried to turn the focus back on the witness's personal life, hoping to discredit their character. As he did this, he made the mistake of pulling out his own personal documents. What he didn't know was that those papers were inadvertently incriminating. Like a fool, he had mixed in evidence of his own fraudulent activities. The look on his face when the prosecutor pointed this out was priceless. It was a clear case of karma, and in the end, the jury convicted him with solid evidence. His own arrogant attempts to turn the case in his favor had backfired spectacularly. Story 2. I'm a public defender, and this one case still haunts me. A man had been charged with robbery after allegedly breaking into a small convenience store and stealing cash. He seemed like an easy case for the prosecution. The evidence was clear, and the surveillance footage was damning. He had no alibi, and his defense was weak, to say the least. But here's where it gets interesting. During the trial, he kept claiming that he had been framed by a rival store owner who had a personal vendetta against him. He spent most of the trial attacking the other store, accusing them of orchestrating the entire thing just to get him out of the way. The irony came when his own lawyer, who had tried to maintain some distance from the accusing rhetoric, accidentally uncovered something far more suspicious. On cross-examination, a hidden witness came forward, a former friend of the defendant. This friend admitted to helping the defendant with the robbery, and apparently the defendant had just gotten greedy. They confessed to planning the whole thing, but the robbery had gone wrong. The defendant's false accusations against the rival store owner came back to bite him, and that led to a pretty damning piece of evidence: the former friend's testimony, along with their confession. Karma can be a real kicker in the court. Story 3. This was one of the most bizarre courtroom experiences I've had, and the karma in this case was almost poetic. A high-profile celebrity chef was sued for plagiarism by a former employee who claimed that they had created a signature dish that the chef later stole. The celebrity chef, of course, denied everything, claiming that the dish was an original creation and that any similarity to the employee's recipe was purely coincidental. The trial was full of drama, but the real twist came when the employee, who was a quiet and reserved person, presented their evidence. They didn't just have recipes. They had emails, photos, and video footage showing how the dish was developed in their own kitchen long before the celebrity chef had ever made it public. The defendant's defense was shaky at best, and at one point, they made the mistake of accusing the employee of trying to ruin their career for personal gain. That's when the karma hit. The celebrity chef's own sous chef took the stand and testified that they had witnessed the celebrity chef stealing recipes from various employees over the years, and that the plaintiff's dish was just the tip of the iceberg. They had also recorded conversations with the chef, where they boasted about how they could steal the best ideas and profit from them. The court was left stunned, and the celebrity chef's reputation, already fragile due to previous allegations of bad behavior, took a major hit. Karma struck in the form of the very people the chef had exploited, and it wasn't a pretty sight. Story 4. I once worked in a courthouse, and there was this one trial that had everyone talking for weeks. A man was being tried for assault after allegedly attacking someone during a bar fight. He was a known troublemaker with a reputation for getting into brawls, but he had somehow managed to wriggle his way out of trouble in the past. This time, however, he was in deep trouble. The victim had a clear case, with multiple witnesses and medical reports that confirmed the severity of the assault. During the trial, the defendant maintained that he had acted in self-defense, insisting that the victim had provoked him. He even tried to paint himself as the victim, claiming that the other person had started the altercation by calling him a derogatory name. But here's where the karma kicked in. One of the witnesses, a bystander who had seen everything unfold, casually mentioned that he had witnessed the defendant in a prior incident a few months earlier, an incident where the defendant had actually started a fight in the same bar, and the person who had been attacked was not the instigator. The defendant turned pale, but his arrogance didn't allow him to back down. It wasn't until the bystander produced his phone and showed the court video footage of the earlier fight that the defendant's story completely fell apart. Karma, in the form of a seemingly unrelated piece of evidence, had nailed him. He was convicted, and the bar was set higher for him in future cases. Story 5. This story comes from a close friend who is a prosecutor. She told me about a trial that involved a woman who had filed a lawsuit for defamation against a former colleague. The woman claimed that her reputation had been ruined after the colleague spread lies about her at work, causing her to lose clients and even her job. She came off as a victim, and the jury seemed to be on her side. However, as the trial progressed, the defense uncovered something that turned the case on its head. The woman had a history of sending hurtful, false rumors about other people, just like the one she was accusing her colleague of. As it turned out, the woman had repeatedly spread vicious lies about other employees to damage their careers in order to get ahead at work. She had even fabricated stories about her own boss to try and gain favor in her workplace. It was a stunning reversal of fortune, and the jury quickly saw through the woman's act. The defendant presented irrefutable evidence showing that the plaintiff was a habitual liar, and that the entire lawsuit was retaliation for a personal vendetta. It was one of the clearest cases of karma I've ever heard about. The woman was not only defeated in the lawsuit, but she was also professionally exposed for her behavior. Story 6. I once worked as a court clerk in a small town, and I'll never forget a particular trial that made me believe in the full force of karma. The case involved a wealthy businessman who was being sued by a former employee for wrongful termination. The businessman had a reputation for being ruthless, but had managed to keep his personal life well hidden. He claimed that the employee was terminated for incompetence, but the former employee insisted it was because they had refused to participate in unethical practices at the company. During the trial, the businessman seemed very confident. He had a team of high-powered lawyers, and he sat back in his chair, constantly smirking, as if he was untouchable. The employee, on the other hand, was nervous and had little legal backing, but they were determined to tell their story. The turning point came when the plaintiff's attorney managed to subpoena some internal emails between the businessman and other members of his staff. These emails contained instructions from the businessman himself, telling employees to cover up illegal actions, falsify financial records, and mislead clients. The businessman, thinking he could outsmart everyone, tried to claim the emails were, but when a key witness, one of his former employees who had since left the company, testified that they had personally seen the businessman send these exact emails, the whole case unraveled. The jury couldn't ignore the damning evidence, and the businessman's smug attitude turned to panic. Karma came in the form of the very lies he had woven to protect himself, and he ended up losing the case. Worse for him, the revelation of his illegal activities led to a criminal investigation. His world came crashing down, and the former employee was awarded not only damages but also a public apology. I've never seen someone so quickly go from untouchable to utterly destroyed. Story 7. A few years ago, I was involved in a high-profile divorce case, and the irony that unfolded during the trial was unreal. The couple had been married for nearly 20 years, and the husband, a prominent lawyer, was accused of cheating on his wife with a younger woman, not to mention hiding assets to avoid paying alimony. The husband, who was the primary breadwinner in the family, painted himself as the victim, claiming that his wife had grown distant and uninterested in their marriage. He even went so far as to claim that the affair didn't matter because the marriage was already effectively over. His defense was that he was merely living his best life while his wife clung to an outdated sense of what the relationship was. The wife, however, was calm and collected during her testimony. She didn't play the victim card or seek pity. Instead, she focused on the facts. She had raised their children, supported his career, and even helped manage his business's finances. But here's where karma kicked in. During the trial, the wife's lawyer presented a set of private messages between the husband and his mistress. It turns out that not only had he been cheating for years, but he had also been bad-mouthing his wife in private chats, calling her lazy and ungrateful. Then came the bombshell. The wife's lawyer had discovered that the husband had been hiding millions of dollars in a secret offshore account. The husband had been using these funds to support his affair, while pretending to be broke and convincing his wife that she was entitled to nothing. The moment the mistress's texts were read aloud in court, the room went silent. The man's entire defense fell apart. The husband's attempt to paint himself as a wronged party was flipped on its head. Karma wasn't just about the affair. It was about the total exposure of his lies and manipulation. In the end, the wife was awarded a significant portion of the assets, and the husband's reputation was utterly tarnished. It was a complete reversal, and I'll always remember how the truth came out in the most poetic way possible. Story 8. I've been a legal assistant for over a decade, and one case I'll never forget involved a seemingly innocent lawsuit that turned into a spectacular example of karma. A woman sued a small family-owned bakery for burning her cake, claiming that they ruined her wedding day and were responsible for emotional distress. At first glance, it seemed like a typical customer complaint. The bakery had made a mistake, and the woman was understandably upset. However, the more I learned about the case, the more it seemed like there was more to the story. During the trial, the woman's attorney relentlessly pushed for compensation, arguing that the bride's happiness was permanently ruined by the ruined cake. The bakery, however, was known for its impeccable service and had countless glowing reviews. The defense team had only one counterpoint. They had tried to offer a replacement cake, but the bride had refused. When the bakery's lawyer dug deeper, it was revealed that the bride had a history of making over-the-top complaints to local businesses, often demanding refunds or free products for minor issues. She had done the same thing to a florist, a photographer, and even a caterer. All of them had previously offered to fix the problems, but she turned them down and instead sought legal action. Karma arrived when the defense introduced social media posts from the bride's accounts. It turned out that she had been bragging to her friends about how she had been working the system to get free services or products, calling it her game. The jury was appalled when it was shown that she had planned to take legal action from the beginning, and the burnt cake was just an excuse. The court ruled in favor of the bakery, and the bride's reputation was dragged through the mud. She was ordered to pay the bakery's legal fees, and Karma, in the form of her own greed and dishonesty, turned the case on its head. Story 9. A few years ago, I attended a trial where a businessman was accused of embezzling funds from a non-profit organization. He had spent years building a reputation as a philanthropist and had successfully convinced many people to donate large sums to his cause. On the surface, everything seemed legitimate, but behind the scenes, he had been siphoning money off the top, living a life of luxury funded by the very donations meant for charity. The trial was lengthy, with the prosecution working hard to prove that the businessman had falsified financial records and hidden the money in overseas accounts. The defendant, however, maintained his innocence, arguing that any discrepancies were simple mistakes and that he had acted in good faith. His smug demeanor and confident speeches made it seem like he was going to get away with it. But then came the moment of pure karma. One of the charity's major donors, a wealthy but reclusive woman, took the stand. She had donated a significant amount of money to the organization, and she made it clear that she was furious when she learned about the embezzlement. She revealed that she had been in contact with a private investigator who had been tailing the businessman for months. The investigator had gathered evidence showing that the businessman had been living a lavish lifestyle with the funds he had stolen, including expensive vacations, cars, and luxury gifts, items that were far beyond the income of a non-profit executive. In a move that no one saw coming, the private investigator's report was entered as evidence, and the businessman's entire defense crumbled. The man's face went pale as the jury saw clear evidence of his guilt. The man was convicted, and the charity was not only awarded damages but also received a large settlement as a result of the embezzlement. It was a victory for integrity, and the businessman's fall from grace was as dramatic as it was ironic. Karma had taken its sweet time, but it eventually delivered a crushing blow. Story 10. I had the misfortune of witnessing a courtroom drama that unfolded between two neighbors in a bitter property dispute. One neighbor, a young woman, had recently bought her first home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. She was excited to settle in, but her neighbor, a middle-aged man who had lived in the area for years, had a strong dislike for her from the start. He claimed that her property was ruining the aesthetic value of the neighborhood and sued her for violating community guidelines. His main complaint was that her garden was too wild and didn't match the proper landscaping of the neighborhood. Throughout the trial, the man presented what he believed was solid evidence, citing vague guidelines about lawn maintenance and garden design. He painted himself as the defender of community values and tried to convince the court that her garden was an eyesore. The woman, on the other hand, calmly argued that her garden was a personal project and that there was no rule against it in the neighborhood's official guidelines. As the trial continued, a key witness, an expert on property value, was brought in to testify. The expert revealed that the man's own property had been significantly devalued due to a poorly maintained structure on his land, which had been allowed to fall into disrepair for years. The neighbor's property was, in fact, a much bigger eyesore than the woman's garden ever was. Karma came crashing down when the expert's photos and evidence were shown in court, proving that the man had no grounds to complain about someone else's yard when his own home was the real problem. In the end, the court ruled in favor of the woman, and not only did she win the case, but the man was also forced to pay her legal fees. The irony was almost too much to handle. He had tried to destroy her life over something so trivial, and it turned out that his own neglect was the real issue all along. Karma had taken its sweet time, but it was worth every second. Story 11. A few years ago, I was working as an assistant for a personal injury lawyer. And one of the most memorable cases I've ever seen involved a woman who was suing a company for a slip-and-fall accident. She claimed to have fallen in a grocery store due to a puddle of water that had been left unattended and that it caused serious injuries, including a sprained ankle and a fractured wrist. She had medical reports to back up her claims, and she was asking for a substantial settlement to cover her medical bills and lost wages. The case seemed pretty straightforward at first, but then the defendant, the grocery store's attorney, came forward with a piece of evidence that completely turned the case upside down. They had footage from the store's surveillance cameras showing that the woman had not only walked past the puddle without any issue, but later, she was seen at a cafe across the street, not limping or showing any signs of injury and enjoying a coffee with friends. The real kicker, however, came when the defense attorney pulled out another set of photos from the woman's social media account. It turned out that just days after the supposed accident, the woman had posted a picture of herself hiking in the mountains, smiling and posing like nothing was wrong. The contrast between her claims of severe injury and her actions showed that she had not been honest about the extent of her supposed injuries. The woman's case fell apart in an instant. The jury saw her as dishonest and opportunistic, and the court ruled in favor of the grocery store. The most ironic part? She had tried to play the system to get a quick payout, only to have her own social media expose her lies. Karma in this case was a swift and undeniable force. Story 12. There's a story that's still talked about in my town, and it involves an arrogant CEO who thought he could walk away from a lawsuit without facing any consequences. This particular man was being sued by a former employee who had been wrongfully fired after complaining about harassment and mistreatment in the workplace. The CEO had always boasted about how untouchable he was, often dismissing complaints with a condescending attitude, believing his wealth and power would shield him from any legal repercussions. The trial was a battle between a vulnerable employee and a powerful corporate giant. The CEO's defense was full of arrogance, and he dismissed the idea that he had done anything wrong. The case seemed like a simple one until the plaintiff's lawyer dug into the company's internal emails. It turned out that the CEO had sent several messages to other executives explicitly discussing ways to get rid of employees who questioned the company's culture and complained too much. In one particularly damning email, the CEO himself had written, "Sometimes we need to remind these people who's in charge." The plaintiff's lawyer, with a look of triumph, presented these emails in court, which completely contradicted the CEO's version of events. The room was silent as the jury processed the evidence. The CEO, who had spent the entire trial with a smug, self-assured smile, was now visibly sweating and fumbling for an explanation. The verdict was a swift one. He was found guilty of wrongful termination, and the employee was awarded substantial damages. Karma had come in the form of the CEO's own words, which were ultimately his undoing. His cocky attitude and belief that he could manipulate the system were shattered in an instant, and the lesson he learned was clear. No one is above accountability, no matter how powerful they think they are. Story 13. I remember a case I worked on as a paralegal that revolved around a woman suing her former roommate for stealing her personal items, including expensive clothing and jewelry. The defendant, a young woman who had lived with the plaintiff for several months, denied any wrongdoing, claiming that the accusations were baseless and that the plaintiff was simply trying to get revenge for an argument they had months earlier. The trial seemed like it was going to be a typical roommate dispute until the defense lawyer made a critical error. Instead of addressing the accusations directly, the defendant started bad-mouthing the plaintiff, claiming that she was unstable and had a tendency to exaggerate everything. She even went so far as to accuse the plaintiff of having a history of stealing from previous roommates. The plaintiff, however, had a trick up her sleeve. She had secretly recorded several of the defendant's phone calls during their time living together, conversations where the defendant confessed to taking her things. One of the recordings even featured the defendant laughing about how easy it had been to steal the items while the plaintiff was away at work. To make matters worse, the plaintiff also had text messages from the defendant, offering to sell some of the stolen goods to a third party. When the defense lawyer realized what had happened, it was too late. The jury listened to the recordings and the defendant's entire defense crumbled. The irony, of course, was that the defendant's attempts to discredit the plaintiff were what ultimately exposed her own guilt. She was found guilty of theft, and the plaintiff was awarded damages for the stolen property. Karma in this case was swift, and it was delivered via the defendant's own words and actions. Story 14. I once sat in on a small claims court case involving a couple who was suing a contractor for poor workmanship. They had hired him to remodel their kitchen, but the finished product was riddled with issues. The countertops were uneven, the cabinets were poorly installed, and the plumbing was leaking. The couple was asking for a refund for the work done, claiming that the contractor had failed to meet the terms of their agreement. The contractor, however, was extremely confident in his defense. He insisted that the couple had been difficult clients who had changed their minds multiple times throughout the process, leading to delays. He even claimed that they had been rude and demanding, and that was why the work wasn't up to their standards. Throughout the trial, he remained smug and dismissive, claiming that he was the true victim of unreasonable clients. That's when karma stepped in. The couple had done their homework and brought in expert witnesses, including another contractor, who pointed out the numerous issues with the work that had nothing to do with the couple's requests. The most shocking part came when the expert pointed out that the contractor had reused old materials from previous jobs, passing them off as new and charging the couple full price. The contractor's attempt to portray himself as the innocent party backfired when he was confronted with the evidence of his own dishonesty. The court ruled in favor of the couple, and they were awarded a refund. The contractor's reputation was severely damaged, and he was ordered to pay the legal fees. Karma had come for him, not in the form of angry clients, but because he had tried to get away with cutting corners and deceiving those who trusted him. His smug attitude had only made his downfall even more satisfying. Story 15. A friend of mine was involved in a civil case a few years ago that still gets mentioned whenever people talk about the most poetic examples of karma. The case involved a well-known local businessman who had built his empire on the back of several shady practices. He owned a chain of restaurants, and there were long-standing rumors that he had been stealing tips from his employees and exploiting workers in other ways. He had a reputation for being ruthless, and it seemed like no one would dare challenge him. One day, a former employee who had worked at one of his restaurants decided to sue him for unpaid wages. This employee had worked long hours without overtime pay and had been given the bare minimum in terms of tips. The lawsuit was a small claim at first, but it quickly escalated when other former employees came forward with similar complaints. It didn't take long for the story to go viral, with dozens of people coming forward, all with their own tales of mistreatment. The businessman, as expected, denied everything, claiming that the allegations were false and that he had treated his employees well. His defense seemed airtight until it was revealed that he had been secretly recorded during one of his meetings with a lawyer, where he admitted to not paying employees their fair share of tips and even bragged about how he had figured out ways to cheat the system. The recording was leaked to the media, and within days, his empire crumbled. Not only did he lose the case, but his reputation was destroyed, and his business was forced to close several locations. Karma had struck hard and fast, and it was fitting that the man's own greed had brought him down. Story 16. A few years ago, I was sitting in on a small claims court case involving two neighbors. One of them, an older woman, had been renting out her backyard for events. The defendant, her neighbor, was suing her for noise complaints and disturbances that occurred during the weekends, particularly during a wedding the plaintiff had hosted a few months earlier. The defendant claimed the noise was so bad it disrupted his family's weekend routine, and he wanted compensation for the trouble it caused. The plaintiff, a sweet old lady, admitted the event was loud but insisted that everything was within the legal limits of noise ordinances. The defendant, with a sense of superiority, kept boasting about his rights and the fact that he had contacted local authorities multiple times during the past year, demanding that the plaintiff be fined. His attorney was aggressive, painting the plaintiff as a nuisance to the neighborhood, and the defendant demanded financial restitution for his suffering. Just as it seemed like the case was going in the defendant's favor, the plaintiff's attorney made a move that stunned everyone. They revealed that the defendant had been hosting his own loud, late-night parties for years, despite receiving multiple complaints from the very neighbors who were suing. The most ironic moment came when they played a video, which had been taken by the plaintiff herself, of the defendant's own parties, complete with loud music and drunken yelling late into the night. The video was dated months before the wedding event. The defendant turned pale, and the judge ruled in favor of the plaintiff. Karma came through not only in the form of the defendant's hypocrisy, but also in the fact that the plaintiff had the evidence to turn the tables on. His own complaints about noise, in the end, had no standing, especially when he was caught red-handed doing the same thing. Story 17. A few years ago, I worked as a legal assistant on a case involving a real estate developer and a group of local homeowners. The developer, a man known for his cutthroat business practices, had bought up several homes in the area, planning to demolish them to make room for luxury apartments. The homeowners, whose families had lived in the neighborhood for generations, weren't pleased and decided to file a lawsuit to prevent the demolition. The developer insisted that he was simply doing what was best for the community by providing more housing options. He was confident the case would be easy to win, boasting about his wealth and power in the court. Throughout the trial, he kept portraying himself as the hero, while the homeowners were painted as the unreasonable ones, clinging to outdated ideas about community values. However, the tables turned dramatically when one of the homeowners, a woman who had lived in the neighborhood for over 40 years, took the stand. She revealed that years ago, the developer had tried to buy her family's home under the guise of renovating it, offering them a price far below its market value. They had refused, and the developer had repeatedly made lowball offers, attempting to push them out of their home. She had kept all of the offers and correspondence, including a letter from the developer threatening that it would be in their best interest to leave the neighborhood now before prices got worse. The clincher came when the homeowner's lawyer revealed that the developer had misrepresented the neighborhood's zoning laws. The land he intended to develop was, in fact, designated as historical preservation, meaning his plans were not legally permitted. The developer's grandiose claims of providing housing were nothing but a cover for his shady attempts to force people out. The jury ruled in favor of the homeowners, blocking the development and securing the historical preservation status of the neighborhood. Karma came in the form of the developer's own greed and lies, as his manipulative tactics had caught up with him. The homeowners won, and the neighborhood remained safe from his plans. Story 18. I was once part of a jury in a defamation case where a famous actor was suing a tabloid for publishing false stories about his personal life. The actor claimed that the tabloid had falsely accused him of being involved in a criminal scheme, which had severely damaged his reputation and career. Throughout the trial, the actor came off as the perfect victim, claiming that the lies spread by the tabloid had affected his relationships and caused him financial harm. His lawyer made a compelling case, and it seemed like the actor was going to win. However, the defense lawyer did something I did not expect. They presented footage of the actor from years earlier in which he was filmed giving an interview with a prominent TV show. During this interview, he had openly mocked people who sued for defamation, saying, "If you can't handle the heat of the media, then get out of the kitchen. I'm thick-skinned, and I know how to spin any story into gold." The defense lawyer continued by showing several clips of the actor's history of making light of accusations against him and even admitting to fabricating parts of his public persona. The defense argued that the actor had purposefully cultivated a controversial image to increase his fame, and that the tabloid had merely capitalized on the character he himself had built. His public image, they claimed, was already a form of self-defamation. The irony of the situation hit hard, and the jury quickly realized that the actor had, in a way, set himself up for the very thing he was now suing over. He was seeking compensation for the damages caused by stories that, in essence, he had created for publicity. The jury sided with the tabloid, and the actor was left looking like a hypocrite. Karma came in the form of his own media manipulation, which turned against him in the most ironic way possible. Story 19. In a recent case I worked on as a paralegal, a young woman was suing a restaurant for serving her food that caused a severe allergic reaction. She had ordered a salad, and despite informing the server about her nut allergy, she ended up in the hospital after eating. She claimed that the restaurant had failed to take the necessary precautions, causing her medical bills to skyrocket. The woman demanded a large payout to cover her medical expenses and lost wages, arguing that her life had been forever changed by the incident. The restaurant, while sympathetic, argued that they had followed all proper procedures. They claimed that the salad had been prepared according to the woman's specifications, and they presented evidence showing that she had been warned about cross-contamination, which is always a risk with food allergies. The turning point in the case came when the restaurant's attorney presented a series of photos from the woman's social media account. It turned out that just a few weeks before the incident, the woman had posted about visiting a different restaurant with the exact same allergy issue, where she had ordered a meal with nuts and had ignored the server's warnings. She had even posted a picture of herself laughing with friends after the meal, saying, "Don't let allergies get you down." The jury was stunned. The woman's claim that the restaurant had been negligent was undermined by her own behavior. The most ironic twist was that her previous experience with allergies had given her the knowledge to be more careful, yet she had ignored all safety precautions. Karma struck hard when the jury sided with the restaurant, and the woman's case was dismissed. Not only did she lose the case, but her own careless actions had been exposed for the world to see. Story 20. I once worked on a case that involved a car dealership being sued by a customer who claimed they had been sold a defective car. The plaintiff, a middle-aged man, had purchased an expensive used car from the dealership and immediately began experiencing problems with the engine and transmission. The man was furious and demanded a full refund, claiming that the dealership had misrepresented the condition of the car and had sold him a lemon. The dealership maintained that they had provided all necessary disclosures about the car's history, including a report showing that the car had been inspected and passed quality checks. The defense argued that the plaintiff had ignored the dealership's warning that the car, while in good condition, was not brand new and would require routine maintenance, especially since it had been driven for several years. The plaintiff's argument fell apart when the defense presented records showing that the man had neglected to perform the recommended maintenance on the car. Not only that, but they revealed that he had skipped several important service appointments, including one for the car's transmission, a crucial issue he had complained about. The most ironic part came when the dealership's lawyer produced a video of the plaintiff from a few months earlier, bragging about how he had taken the car on a long road trip despite knowing it was due for an inspection. The plaintiff's own negligence had led to the problems he was now blaming on the dealership. The jury quickly realized that the man had failed to maintain the car properly, and his lawsuit was nothing more than an attempt to avoid responsibility for his own poor decisions. Karma struck in the form of his own actions, and the dealership was cleared of any wrongdoing. Story 21. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to observe a civil case where a young couple was suing a contractor for a disastrous home renovation. They had hired the contractor to renovate their kitchen and living room, but after months of delays and poor quality work, they decided to take him to court. They claimed that he had used subpar materials, performed shoddy work, and failed to meet the agreed-upon deadlines. Throughout the trial, the contractor maintained that he had done everything he could and that the couple was simply being unreasonable. He insisted that he had run into some delays, but that the work was actually up to standard. He also claimed that the couple had made constant changes to the plans during the project, which led to the delays. The contractor even brought in his own expert witnesses to testify that the work he had done was, in fact, of good quality. However, the couple's attorney had a surprise in store. They presented a series of photographs from the renovation, showing rooms with crooked walls, unfinished drywall, and cabinets that had been installed incorrectly. The contractor's defense seemed to be crumbling when the photos were introduced. But what really turned the case was an unexpected twist. The couple's lawyer had somehow uncovered a social media post from the contractor himself, bragging about how he had just completed several high-end renovation projects. In one post, he specifically mentioned that the materials he used were top of the line. The couple's lawyer pointed out that the materials used in their home were anything but high-end. They were cheap, low-quality materials. The contractor had been lying about the type of materials he used, which was a clear violation of the contract. In the end, the couple won the case, and the contractor had to reimburse them for the cost of the repairs and renovations. The most ironic part was that the contractor's own boastful posts about his supposed quality work had come back to haunt him. Karma caught up with him when his own words proved that he was not only dishonest, but also had the audacity to flaunt his lies. Story 22. A few years ago, I watched a criminal trial unfold that still sticks with me. It involved a man who had been accused of insurance fraud after staging a car accident and attempting to claim a large settlement. He had deliberately caused a collision by rear-ending a vehicle in order to make it appear like the other driver was at fault, so he could collect money from his insurance company. The defendant claimed that he had been an innocent victim in the accident and that the collision had caused him significant injury. He had medical records and other evidence to support his claim, and his attorney argued that the other driver's negligence was the cause of the accident. However, the prosecution quickly found holes in his. It wasn't long before they discovered that the defendant had a history of similar accidents, all of which seemed suspiciously linked to insurance claims. He had filed multiple claims in the past for accidents where the circumstances were identical, rear-ending someone, claiming injury, and collecting settlements. But the real bombshell came when the prosecution uncovered video footage from a nearby surveillance camera. It showed that the defendant had been texting on his phone just moments before the crash, and the footage clearly revealed that he had intentionally caused the accident. The defendant's defense quickly fell apart as the prosecution showed the jury the video evidence. It was a moment of pure karma when the defendant's own reckless behavior and attempts to defraud the system were exposed for the world to see. The jury convicted him, and he was sentenced to prison time for insurance fraud and reckless driving. His attempt to game the system not only failed but backfired spectacularly, costing him his freedom. Story 23. I once attended a trial where a man was suing a car dealership for selling him a lemon, a car that was full of issues that had never been disclosed to him at the time of purchase. The plaintiff claimed that the car had a multitude of mechanical problems, including a faulty transmission, defective airbags, and a leaking oil pan. He wanted the dealership to either refund his money or provide him with a replacement vehicle. The dealership's defense was straightforward. They argued that the car had been sold as is, meaning that they were not responsible for any problems that arose after the sale. The dealership's attorney also pointed out that the plaintiff had signed an agreement acknowledging that he had inspected the car and found it satisfactory before completing the purchase. According to the dealership, they were not liable for any subsequent issues. However, the plaintiff's lawyer was sharp and managed to dig deeper into the dealership's business practices. It was uncovered that the dealership had a history of selling faulty vehicles and had knowingly sold cars with mechanical defects without disclosing them to customers. The turning point in the trial came when a former employee of the dealership testified that he had been instructed by his bosses to cover up issues with cars in order to make the sale. He revealed that the dealership had been running a scheme where they would buy cheap cars, fix only the most obvious problems, and then sell them at a marked-up price without ever fixing the underlying mechanical issues. Karma came swiftly when the jury saw the pattern of deception and dishonesty that had been going on at the dealership. Not only did the plaintiff win his case, but the dealership was also slapped with punitive damages for their fraudulent practices. The most ironic part of the case was how the dealership's own employee, someone they had hoped to silence, had ultimately helped bring them down. The dealer's dishonest behavior was their undoing, and the plaintiff was awarded a full refund for the car, along with additional compensation. Story 20. A friend of mine once told me about a court case she worked on that still makes me laugh. It involved a woman who was suing her former employer for wrongful termination. She claimed that she had been fired after she had complained about workplace conditions, which she described as unsafe and unprofessional. According to her, her boss had an abrasive attitude and had made disparaging remarks about her work performance. She was seeking compensation for lost wages and emotional distress. Her employer, on the other hand, had a completely different version of the story. They claimed that she had been let go for poor performance and for repeatedly violating company policies. They argued that the woman had not met the basic expectations of her role and had been given several warnings before her termination. The most interesting part came when the plaintiff's lawyer presented a series of text messages between the woman and her friends. The messages told a different story. She had been complaining about her job, but not about safety concerns or her boss's behavior. Instead, she had been bad-mouthing her colleagues, gossiping about the company's internal issues, and even bragging about how she was planning to get back at her boss by suing for wrongful termination. The irony of the case was that the woman had set herself up by being too open about her intentions to sue. The text messages painted her as someone who was already planning the lawsuit before she had even been fired. The jury saw through her claims of emotional distress, recognizing that she had been more focused on her revenge than any real harm done by her employer. The case was dismissed, and the woman's credibility was damaged beyond repair. Karma struck in the form of her own careless messages, which completely undermined her lawsuit. The most ironic part was that she had inadvertently exposed herself as the person trying to exploit the situation from the very beginning. Story 25. A few years ago, I had the chance to sit in on a trial that involved a major celebrity suing a tabloid newspaper for defamation. The tabloid had published a story alleging that the celebrity had been involved in a major drug scandal, which was completely untrue. The celebrity claimed that the tabloid's actions had harmed their career and reputation, and they demanded a large sum in damages. The tabloid, on the other hand, argued that the story was protected under freedom of speech laws and that it was based on an anonymous tip they had received. They insisted that they had no intention of defaming the celebrity and that they had simply reported on what they believed to be true at the time. Things took a dramatic turn when the defense introduced a series of interviews and social media posts from the celebrity themselves. In these posts, the celebrity had made numerous public statements about their wild lifestyle and their frequent partying habits, including sharing photos of themselves surrounded by questionable substances. The defense argued that the celebrity had built their public image around being edgy and rebellious, and that the tabloid was simply reporting on the persona that the celebrity had crafted. The most ironic part was when the celebrity's own actions, specifically their efforts to manufacture controversy for publicity, backfired. The court sided with the tabloid, ruling that the publication's reporting was a legitimate form of free speech and not an act of defamation. The celebrity, in trying to control their image, had actually set themselves up for the very scandal they were suing over. Karma, in this case, was delivered in the form of the celebrity's own self-promotion and over-the-top persona, which ultimately backfired in the courtroom. Story 26. I once worked on a case that involved an ex-employee suing a company for wrongful termination after being fired for dishonesty. The plaintiff claimed that he had been let go unfairly and was seeking compensation for lost wages and emotional distress. His defense was that he had been an exemplary employee, but his boss had it out for him due to personal issues. The company, on the other hand, had a very different take. They produced evidence showing that the employee had, in fact, been caught forging documents to cover up mistakes he had made while working on a large project. The company had invested heavily in a new client, and the employee had falsified reports in an attempt to make the project seem more successful than it was. When the company's internal audit revealed the deception, the employee was fired on the spot. The most ironic part of the case came when the plaintiff's lawyer tried to make a case that the company had acted in retaliation for a minor mistake he had made on a previous project. But when the defense attorney showed the court video footage from a meeting in which the employee had bragged to his coworkers about how he had successfully covered up the mistakes to save his job, it was clear that the plaintiff was lying. The defendant's defense team revealed that the employee had been doing this repeatedly, and his actions had ultimately led to the downfall of the project. Karma came when the jury sided with the company, awarding them a victory. The employee's attempt to gain compensation through deception backfired spectacularly. His arrogance in thinking he could get away with it, as well as his attempt to blame the company for his own unethical actions, were exposed for everyone to see. His dishonesty had cost him not just his job but also any chance of winning the case. Story 27. I once attended a courtroom battle between a homeowner and a construction company over a botched home renovation. The homeowner had hired the company to renovate their kitchen and living, but after months of delays and unfinished work, they decided to sue for breach of contract. The homeowner's claims were serious. They said the company had failed to meet deadlines, used cheap materials, and even left the project incomplete in some areas. The construction company's defense was that the homeowner had made several changes to the original design midway through the project, which caused delays and increased costs. They claimed the homeowner had been overly demanding and had requested so many revisions that it was impossible to finish the job on time. They even suggested that the homeowner had contributed to the issues by not sticking to the agreed-upon plans. However, the plaintiff's attorney had a surprise in store. They revealed a series of emails between the homeowner and the construction company that showed the contractor was repeatedly pushing back deadlines without providing any reasonable explanation. The homeowner had remained flexible and patient throughout, even offering to reduce the scope of work to help the contractor meet deadlines. The real twist came when the plaintiff's lawyer showed a video taken by the homeowner, which documented the state of the house. The video clearly showed subpar, including crooked cabinetry, faulty plumbing, and exposed wires. The contractor had promised high-quality materials, but the video revealed that cheap second-rate products were used. What sealed the case, however, was a message sent by the contractor to the homeowner. It was an apology, but not for the poor work or delays. It was an apology for cutting corners and using cheaper materials than originally promised. The jury was shocked, and the construction company was found guilty of breach of contract. Karma came when the contractor's own admission of guilt was used against them. The homeowner won a substantial amount of damages, and the contractor's reputation was forever tarnished.